The sound of the slap echoed through the upscale Korean barbecue restaurant like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of chopsticks froze midair. Every head turned toward the corner table where Deborah Williams stood, her hand still raised, her chest heaving with rage, staring down at the man whose cheek now bore the red imprint of her palm. The man sat perfectly still, his expensive suit unmarred, his cold eyes widening just a fraction. He touched his face slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Around them, the other diners looked on in horror. A waiter dropped a tray. The crash of breaking plates punctuated the silence. Deborah's voice cut through the shocked quiet, sharp and clear. I don't care who you think you are. You don't get to treat me like I'm nothing. The man, Bae Chan-wook, simply stared at her. His jaw clenched. His fingers curled into a fist on the table. But he said nothing. He just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes as she ripped off her apron and threw it on the floor. I quit, Deborah announced to the restaurant manager who had materialized beside the table, his face drained of all color. She walked toward the exit, her head held high, refusing to look back even as she felt the weight of every stare burning into her back. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped out into the cold Seoul night, her hands trembling with adrenaline. Behind her, inside the restaurant, Chan-wook finally moved. He picked up his napkin, dabbed at his mouth with careful precision, and stood. The manager rushed over, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the table. Mr. Bae, please. I am so sorry. She is new. She didn't know who you were. Please forgive. Chan-wook held up one hand. The manager's desperate apologies died in his throat. What's her name? Chan-wook asked, his voice quiet, almost curious. Deborah, sir. Deborah Williams. She's from Nigeria. She's only been working here for. Find out where she lives? Chan-wook interrupted. He straightened his tie, his expression giving nothing away. I want her address by tonight. The manager nodded frantically, relief and terror warring on his features. As Chan-wook walked toward the exit, every person in the restaurant remained frozen, afraid to move until he was gone. The VIP section, usually reserved for men like him, sat empty. He had been sitting in the main dining area that night, keeping a low profile for a business meeting that had been canceled, a random choice that had led to this moment. Outside, the winter wind bit through Chan-wook's clothes, but he barely felt it. He stood on the sidewalk, looking in the direction Deborah had gone, though she had long since disappeared into the maze of Gangnam streets. His assistant, Mr. Park, appeared at his elbow, always hovering nearby, always ready. Sir, should I? Yes, Chan-wook said. Find her. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since Deborah Williams had arrived in Seoul with nothing but a battered suitcase and a desperate hope that South Korea would offer her something Nigeria couldn't. Opportunities. Safety. A chance to send money home to her younger sister Chioma, who deserved a university education, who deserved more than the poverty that had defined their childhood in Lagos. But Seoul had been nothing like the K-dramas Chioma loved to watch. It was harsh and cold and exhausting. The language barrier felt like a wall she kept slamming into. People looked through her as if she were invisible, or worse, looked at her with barely concealed disdain. She was exotic when it was convenient, invisible when it wasn't. The job at Hanok Barbecue had been her third in as many months. The pay was slightly better than the others, and her coworker Min Seo had been kind, teaching her Korean phrases during their breaks, warning her about which customers to avoid, which ones had wandering hands, which ones complained no matter what. Some customers, Min Seo had told her just that morning, you just bow to. No matter what they say, no matter how they treat you. It's not worth the trouble. Deborah had nodded, but inside, something had rebelled. She had spent her whole life bowing. Bowing to circumstances, to poverty, to men who thought they owned the world and everyone in it. She had come to Seoul to build something different, something better. And then he had snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. Now, walking back to her tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood far from the glittering lights of Gangnam, Deborah felt the adrenaline draining away, replaced by a creeping dread. What had she done? She'd quit the best job she'd had in months. Rent was due in 5 days. Chioma's university fees were due in 2 weeks. The remittance she'd promised her mother was already late. Stupid, she whispered to herself in the empty street. So stupid. Hey besties, before you find out what happens next, if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever stood up to someone powerful and immediately regretted it? Don't forget to tell me where in the world you are watching from. Now let's get back to Deborah's story. Her apartment was on the fourth floor of a building with no elevator. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Inside, the space was barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and a hot plate. But it was hers. Or it had been, until tonight. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone. 7 missed calls from Min SEO. She couldn't face those calls yet. Couldn't face the questions, or the concern, or the inevitable. I told you so. Instead, Deborah opened the messaging app and stared at the last text from Chioma. It was a photo of her acceptance letter to the University of Lagos, her smile radiant, her hope palpable. I can't believe it. I'm going to make you proud, sister. Thank you for everything. Deborah's throat tightened. She had worked herself to exhaustion for that smile, for that future. And now, because she couldn't control her temper for one more minute, because she had to prove a point to some arrogant businessman who probably wouldn't even remember her face tomorrow, she had thrown it all away. She typed out a message. Chioma, there might be a delay with the money. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. She deleted it before sending. She couldn't do that to her sister. Not yet. Not until she had exhausted every other option. Her phone buzzed. Minesio again. This time, Deborah answered. Are you insane? Minesio's voice was frantic, speaking in rapid Korean before switching to English. Deborah, do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know who that man was? Some rude businessman who thinks money means he can treat people like trash, Deborah said, her voice flat. That wasn't just some businessman. Minesio's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. That was Bae Chanwook. Do you understand? Bae Chanwook. The name meant nothing to Deborah. She said as much. Minesio made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Deborah, he's one of the most powerful men in Seoul. His family controls half of Gangnam. They own businesses, buildings, people. They're connected to everything. The kind of people you don't cross. Ever. Deborah's stomach dropped. Connected? You mean like? Yes, Minesio hissed. Like that. And you slapped him. In front of everyone. Oh God. Deborah, you need to leave Seoul. Tonight. Get on a plane and go back to Nigeria before. Before what? Deborah demanded, but her voice shook. I don't know, but nothing good happens to people who disrespect men like that. Maybe he'll blacklist you from every job in the city. Maybe worse. I've heard stories. I'm not running. Deborah interrupted, though fear was crawling up her spine. I can't. I have nowhere to go. Then pray, Minesio said. Pray he forgets about you. After they hung up, Deborah sat in the dark of her apartment, the city lights filtering through her thin curtains. She thought about praying, about all the prayers she'd sent up over the years, about how few of them seemed to get answered. Instead, she made a plan. Tomorrow she would start looking for a new job. She would grovel if she had to. She would do whatever it took to keep Chioma's dreams alive. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself remember the look on that man's face when her hand connected with his cheek. The shock. The surprise. For just one moment, she hadn't been invisible. She had been seen. The knock on her door came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that made her heart stop. She had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Now she sat up, her pulse hammering in her ears. Who is it? She called out in Korean, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer. Just another 3 knocks, more insistent this time. Deborah climbed out of bed and crept to the door. Her apartment didn't have a peephole. She pressed her ear against the thin wood and heard nothing. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was nothing. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack. 2 men stood in the hallway, both wearing black suits despite the late hour, both with a kind of build that suggested they spent more time in gyms than offices. They looked down at her with expressions that gave nothing away. Ms. Deborah Williams? The taller one asked in accented English. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. Yes. Mr. Bay would like to speak with you. The fear she'd been holding at bay all evening crashed over her like a wave. I don't want any trouble. Tell Mr. Bay I'm sorry, It's not a request, the second man said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Please come with us. Deborah thought about slamming the door, about calling the police, about screaming. But she was a foreign worker in a country where she barely spoke the language, and these men worked for someone powerful. What could the police do? What would they even do for someone like her? Let me get my shoes, she said quietly. They waited while she slipped on her sneakers and grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She sent a quick text to Min SEO. 2 men came to my apartment. They work for him. If something happens to me, she didn't know how to finish that sentence, so she just hit send and followed the men down the stairs. A black sedan waited on the street, its engine purring. One of the men opened the back door, and Deborah climbed in, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. The leather seats were butter soft, the interior smelling of expensive cologne and something else. Power, maybe, or danger. The same thing, really. They drove in silence through the Seoul night, leaving her neighborhood behind, heading toward the glittering towers of Gangnam. Deborah watched the city slide past her window and wondered if she would see another sunrise. Have you ever been so terrified you couldn't think straight? Comment below. I want to hear your stories. And don't forget to like this video if you're on the edge of your seat. The car pulled up in front of an unmarked building, sleek and modern, all glass and steel. The men led her through a lobby where a security guard barely glanced up, then into an elevator that rose smoothly to the top floor. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway lined with abstract art, the kind that probably cost more than Deborah would earn in a lifetime. At the end of the hall, double doors stood open, revealing a private lounge bathed in soft amber light. And there, sitting in a leather chair with a glass of whiskey in his hand, was Bae Chan-wook. He looked different than he had in the restaurant. More relaxed, though no less intimidating. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves. The red mark on his cheek had faded to a faint shadow. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or satisfaction. "Ms. Williams," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Deborah remained standing. "If you're going to kill me, just get it over with." Chan-wook's eyebrows rose. Then, to her complete shock, he laughed. It was a genuine sound, surprised out of him, and it transformed his entire face. "Kill you? Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is," Deborah said, crossing her arms over her chest to hide how badly her hands were shaking. "Your men dragged me out of my apartment in the middle of the night. What am I supposed to think?" "They didn't drag you," Chan-wook pointed out. "You came willingly. Because I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he said, his tone becoming more serious. He set down his glass and leaned forward, studying her with those dark eyes. "You made one tonight at the restaurant. A very interesting choice." Deborah said nothing. Her heart was still pounding, but now confusion was mixing with the fear. This wasn't going how she'd expected. Not that she'd known what to expect. "Do you know," Chan-wook continued, "how long it's been since someone raised their voice to me, let alone struck me?" "I'm guessing not recently," Deborah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm despite her fear. 7 years, Chan-wook said. 7 years since anyone dared. And that person, he paused, something dark crossing his face. "That person is no longer a problem. But you? You're different." "How?" Deborah demanded. "How am I different?" "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Chan-wook said, echoing words that would later become significant. "I haven't decided which yet." "You had no idea who I was, did you?" "No," Deborah admitted. "But it wouldn't have mattered. You were rude. You treated me like I was beneath you, like I was nothing. I don't care how much money you have, or how much power you think you have. Nobody gets to do that to me." Chan-wook sat back, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Everyone apologizes to me, Ms. Williams. Everyone. Kings, politicians, CEOs. They all bow and scrape and tell me how sorry they are for whatever microscopic offense they think they've committed. But you? You quit your job and walked away like I was the one who should be apologizing." "You should be," Deborah shot back. The smile widened. "Perhaps. But that's not how my world works." "Then your world is broken," Deborah said. For a moment, Chan-wook just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Seoul skyline. "My world, as you call it, is complicated. I am the head of the Baekdu faction. Do you know what that means?" Deborah shook her head, though dread was pooling in her stomach. "It means I control significant portions of this city. Construction, entertainment, security, imports. If it happens in Gangnam, I either own it or I take a percentage. It also means," he turned back to face her, "that I am not a good man. I do things that would horrify you. I make decisions that destroy lives. People fear me because they should. Why are you telling me this?" Deborah whispered. "Because I want you to understand what you've walked into," Chan-wook said. "I could have you deported with one phone call. I could have you blacklisted from every business in Seoul. I could make you disappear, and no one would ask questions." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I'm not going to do any of those things." "Then what do you want?" Chan-wook returned to his chair, picking up his whiskey and taking a slow sip before answering. "My grandmother is a traditional woman. Very traditional. She believes a man my age should be married, should be building a family, should be bringing honor to our name through a proper union. She's been pressuring me for years." Deborah blinked, completely lost. What does that have to do with me? I've brought women home before. Chanwook continued as if she hadn't spoken. Beautiful women, educated women, women from good families. My grandmother can smell a fake from a kilometer away. She knows they're after my money or my influence or my name. She dismisses them all within minutes. Good for her, Deborah said, still not understanding. I need someone real, Chanwook said, finally getting to the point. Someone who doesn't want anything from me, who isn't impressed by who I am, who will sit at my grandmother's table and be exactly who they are. Someone who, if my grandmother asks them a difficult question, won't simper and lie. Understanding dawned slowly, horribly. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? One dinner, Chanwook said. This Sunday. That's all. You show up, you be yourself, you sit through one meal with my family, and then you walk away. In exchange, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. Deborah picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it. It was a bank transfer form. The amount made her vision blur. 20 million won, she breathed. That was enough to pay her rent for 6 months, to send Chioma to university, to send money home to her mother, to finally stop drowning for just a moment. That's for one dinner, Chanwook said. 3 hours of your time. You sit, you eat, you make conversation, you leave. Simple. Nothing about this is simple, Deborah said, but her eyes kept drifting back to that number. 20 million won. It was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. Think of it as acting, Chanwook suggested. You pretend to be someone who might actually tolerate my company for a few hours. My grandmother is satisfied. Everyone goes home happy. And you get enough money to solve whatever problems brought you to Seoul in the first place. Deborah's mind raced. This was wrong on so many levels. It was a lie. It was taking money under false pretenses. It was stepping into a world she didn't understand, with a man who had just admitted to being dangerous. But it was also the answer to every prayer she'd whispered into the dark. It was Chioma's education. It was her mother's medical bills. It was not being evicted next week. Why me? She asked, stalling, trying to think clearly. You could hire any actress in Seoul to do this. Because actresses are trained to lie convincingly, Chanwook said. My grandmother would see through them in seconds. But you? You don't know how to be anything but honest. Even now, I can see you thinking about how wrong this is, how you shouldn't do it. That authenticity is exactly what I need. One dinner, Deborah repeated slowly. And then we never see each other again. One dinner, Chanwook confirmed. You show up at my family estate this Sunday at 6 p.m. You stay until 9 p.m. Then you leave. The money appears in your account the next morning, and you go back to your life. We'll probably never cross paths again in this city. Deborah looked at the bank form again, at the zeros that could change everything. She thought about Chioma's acceptance letter, about her mother's tired voice on their last phone call, about the landlord who'd been leaving increasingly aggressive notes on her door. She thought about slapping this man just hours earlier, about how she'd felt powerful for exactly one moment before reality came crashing back. I need more than that, she heard herself say. If I'm going to lie to your grandmother, if I'm going to sit at your family table and pretend to be something I'm not, I want enough to matter. 30 million won. And I want half up front. Chanwook's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed again, that same surprised sound. You're negotiating with me? Do you have any idea how many people would kill to have this opportunity? I don't care about other people, Deborah said, channeling every ounce of courage she had left. You came to me. You need me specifically. So my price is 30 million, half up front. Take it or leave it. For a long moment, Chanwook just stared at her. Deborah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She'd overplayed her hand. He was going to laugh in her face and have his men throw her out. Or worse. Then Chanwook smiled. 25 million. 15 up front, 10 after. That's my final offer. Deborah's knees went weak. She sat down abruptly in the chair she'd been refusing all night. Deal. Then we have an agreement, Ms. Williams. Chanwook pulled out his phone and made a quick call in Korean, too fast for Deborah to follow. When he hung up, he said, the first payment will be in your account within the hour. My assistant, Mr. Park, will contact you tomorrow with the details. He'll brief you on my family, on what to expect, on how to behave. I know how to behave, Deborah said, some of her spirit returning now that the shock was wearing off. I'm sure you do, Chanwook said dryly. But there are cultural specifics you'll need to know. Korean family dinners have rules, especially in traditional families like mine. Mr. Park will help you navigate them. Deborah nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. Can I ask you something? You've asked me several things already, Chanwook pointed out, but he gestured for her to continue. That man you mentioned, The one who raised his voice to you 7 years ago. What happened to him? Chan-wook's expression went cold, all traces of amusement vanishing. He learned that there are consequences for disrespect in my world. But unlike you, he knew exactly who I was when he chose to cross me. That makes all the difference. So I'm only alive because I was ignorant? Deborah asked, not sure if she should be offended or relieved. You're alive? Chan-wook said. Because you were honest. You didn't know who I was, so you treated me exactly how you treat any rude customer. There's something refreshing about that. Something I haven't experienced in a very long time. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. My men will drive you home. Get some rest, Ms. Williams. Sunday will be more challenging than you think. Deborah stood as well, her legs still shaky. Just one thing. At this dinner, do you want me to act like I like you? Or can I be honest about that too? Chan-wook's smile returned, sharp as a blade. My grandmother values honesty above all else. If you act too affectionate, she'll know it's fake. Be yourself. That's all I'm asking. Even if myself thinks you're arrogant and rude, especially then, Chan-wook said, she'll find that far more believable than if you pretend I'm perfect. If you're loving this wild ride, show some love with a like. And drop a comment. Would you have taken Chan-wook's deal? Let me know below. The drive back to her apartment felt surreal. Deborah kept checking her phone, waiting for the bank notification, half convinced this had all been some elaborate prank. Then her phone buzzed. She opened her banking app with trembling fingers and stared at the number. 15 million won had appeared in her account like magic, like a miracle, like a deal with the devil. She sat in the back of the sedan, watching the city lights blur past, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. One dinner. Just one dinner with a dangerous man and his traditional family. How hard could it be? The next morning, Deborah woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, most of them from Minesio. She scrolled through them. Are you alive? Please tell me you're okay. I'm calling the police. Deborah, answer your phone. She called Minesio back before her friend could actually involve the authorities. Oh, thank God. Minesio breathed when she answered. What happened? Where did they take you? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, Deborah said, sitting up in bed and rubbing her eyes. Sunlight streamed through her window, bright and ordinary, making last night feel even more unreal. Actually, I'm better than fine. She explained the deal, leaving out the specific amount, but mentioning that she'd been hired for a family dinner. Minesio listened in stunned silence. You're going to have dinner with Bae Chan-wook's family? Minesio finally said. Deborah, do you understand how insane that is? These aren't normal people. This isn't a normal situation. I know, Deborah said. But it's one dinner. And the money, Minesio, it's enough to change my life. I can send my sister to university. I can actually breathe for once. If you survive, Minesio muttered. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll call me the second it's over. I promise, Deborah said. At 10 a.m., her doorbell rang. Deborah answered it to find a well-dressed man in his 40s, his expression professionally neutral, holding a leather briefcase. Ms. Williams? I'm Mr. Park, Mr. Bae's personal assistant. May I come in? Deborah stepped aside, suddenly very aware of how tiny and shabby her apartment looked. Mr. Park didn't seem to notice or care. He set his briefcase on her small table, opened it, and pulled out a tablet and several folders. We have 4 days to prepare you, Mr. Park said without preamble. That's not much time, but it will have to do. Let's begin with the family structure. For the next 2 hours, Mr. Park walked Deborah through the intricacies of the Bae family. Chan-wook's father had died 5 years ago in what Mr. Park delicately called a business dispute. Chan-wook had taken over at 26, younger than anyone expected, and had consolidated power ruthlessly. His grandmother, matriarch of the family, lived in the ancestral estate in Bukshin and held enormous influence over family decisions. She's traditional in every sense, Mr. Park explained. She values respect, honesty, and strength of character above all else. She despises weakness and she absolutely hates liars. What about Chan-wook's mother? Deborah asked. Deceased, Mr. Park said shortly. Cancer, when he was 15. His grandmother raised him after that. There were also uncles, aunts, and cousins to remember. Uncle Kyung-soo, who had expected to take over after Chan-wook's father died and still resented being passed over. Aunt Min-young, who cared more about appearances than substance. Various cousins and associates who would all be watching, judging, looking for weaknesses. They're going to hate me, Deborah said, feeling overwhelmed. Probably, Mr. Park agreed. You're a foreign woman with no family connections, no wealth, no status. By their standards, you're completely unsuitable. But that works in our favor. How? Because the grandmother doesn't care about their standards, Mr. Park said with a small smile. She cares about whether you're real. Everything else is noise. Next came the cultural briefing. Korean dining etiquette, especially in traditional settings, was complex. Wait for elders to begin eating. Never pour your own drink. Use both hands when receiving or giving something to an elder. Don't stick your chopsticks straight up in your rice. The list went on and on. What if I mess up? Deborah asked, her head spinning. You probably will, Mr. Park said bluntly. You're not Korean. They'll expect mistakes. What matters is how you handle them. Apologize sincerely, accept correction gracefully, and move on. Don't make excuses or get defensive. They practiced basic Korean phrases, greetings, thank yous, apologies. Deborah's Korean was still rough, but Mr. Park assured her that trying was more important than perfection. The grandmother will appreciate the effort, he said. It shows respect. On Saturday, the day before the dinner, Mr. Park arrived with a garment bag. Inside was a beautiful hanbok, the traditional Korean dress, in deep burgundy silk with delicate embroidery. It was the most expensive piece of clothing Deborah had ever touched. Mr. Bay thought you might not have appropriate attire, Mr. Park said. This belonged to his mother. The grandmother will recognize it. Deborah's hands stilled on the silk. Won't that be weird? Wearing his dead mother's clothes. In Korean culture, it's a sign of respect and connection, Mr. Park explained. It shows that you're being welcomed into the family, even temporarily. The grandmother will see it as a good omen. Or a cruel trick, Deborah thought, but didn't say. She tried on the hanbok with Mr. Park's help. The traditional dress was complicated, with multiple layers and ties. When she finally looked at herself in her tiny bathroom mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The hanbok transformed her, made her look elegant and dignified, like she belonged in a world far removed from her cramped apartment. Perfect, Mr. Park said with satisfaction. Now, let's go over the family members one more time. You need to know who's who. Sunday arrived too quickly. Deborah spent the morning pacing her apartment, her stomach in knots, second-guessing every decision that had led to this moment. She'd been over the family tree so many times she could recite it in her sleep. She'd practiced her Korean greetings until her tongue hurt. She'd read and reread the etiquette rules Mr. Park had given her. But none of that prepared her for the reality of what she was about to do. At 5 p.m., the black sedan arrived. Deborah climbed in wearing the burgundy hanbok, her natural hair styled in a simple bun, her only jewelry a pair of small gold earrings her mother had given her before she left Nigeria. She'd decided against makeup. If they wanted real, she would give them real. The drive to Buckshin took 40 minutes through Sunday traffic. Deborah watched the city change around her, modern high-rises giving way to traditional neighborhoods where Hanok houses with their distinctive curved roofs lined narrow streets. This was Old Seoul, the soul of history and tradition, worlds away from the neon chaos of Gangnam. The Bay family estate sat behind high walls, invisible from the street. The sedan pulled through iron gates that swung open automatically, and Deborah got her first look at where Chanwook had grown up. The main house was a traditional Hanok but massive, sprawling across the property with multiple wings and courtyards. Even in the fading daylight, it was breathtaking. Mr. Park met her at the entrance. Remember, he said quietly, be yourself. Don't try to impress them. Just survive the next 3 hours. That's not as reassuring as you think it is, Deborah muttered, but she followed him inside. The interior was a perfect blend of traditional and modern, wooden beams and paper screens mixed with contemporary furniture and art. They walked through several rooms before reaching a formal dining room where the family was already gathering. Deborah's heart hammered as she stepped inside. Chanwook saw her first. He was dressed in a traditional hanbok as well, dark blue silk that made him look like he'd stepped out of a historical drama. Something flickered in his eyes when he saw her. Surprise, maybe, or approval. But his expression remained neutral as he approached. Ms. Williams, he said formally. Thank you for coming. Please, meet my grandmother. An elderly woman sat at the head of the low dining table, her back straight despite her age, her eyes sharp as knives. She wore a traditional hanbok in pale gray silk, her white hair pulled back in an elegant bun. This was the matriarch, the woman who held the family together, the woman Deborah needed to convince. Chanwook spoke to his grandmother in Korean, introducing Deborah. The old woman's gaze traveled over Deborah slowly, taking in every detail. The hanbok, the simple hairstyle, the nervousness Deborah couldn't quite hide. Then she spoke, her voice strong despite her years. She says she recognizes the hanbok. Chanwook translated. She's asking where you got it. Your mother's, Deborah said softly, then repeated it in careful Korean. Chanwook's mother. The grandmother's eyes widened slightly. She said something else, longer this time, her tone impossible to read. She wants to know why you agreed to wear it. Chanwook translated. She says most women would be uncomfortable wearing a dead woman's clothes. Deborah took a breath and answered as honestly as she could, mixing English and broken Korean. Because it's beautiful. Because it's an honor. Because in my culture, we believe the dead stay with us through the things they loved. If I wear this, maybe she's here too, watching over this dinner. Chanwook translated, and for the first time, the grandmother smiled. It transformed her severe face, made her look almost gentle. She gestured to the empty spot beside her, speaking rapidly. She wants you to sit next to her, Chanwook said, and Deborah could hear the surprise in his voice. That's unusual. That's a place of honor. Deborah moved to the indicated spot, kneeling carefully in the hanbok. The grandmother reached out and patted her hand, saying something soft that Chanwook didn't translate. Around the table, the other family members were arriving, and Deborah could feel their stares like physical weight. Uncle Kyung-soo arrived first, a man in his 50s with Chanwook's sharp features, but none of his controlled intensity. His eyes went cold when he saw Deborah sitting in the place of honor. He spoke to Chanwook in rapid Korean, his tone making his displeasure clear even if Deborah couldn't understand the words. Chanwook's response was brief and firm. Whatever he said made his uncle's jaw clench, but the older man took his seat without further argument. Aunt Min-young followed, dripping in designer labels and diamonds. Her smile plastic as she greeted the grandmother and pointedly ignored Deborah. More family members filed in. Cousins, associates, people whose names Deborah struggled to remember from Mr. Park's briefing. They all stared. They all whispered. None of them bothered to hide their shock at seeing a black woman in traditional Korean dress sitting beside their matriarch. The grandmother spoke again, her voice cutting through the murmurs. The room fell silent. Chanwook translated for Deborah's benefit. She's telling them you're our honored guest tonight, and anyone who shows disrespect will answer to her. Deborah's throat tightened with unexpected gratitude. The old woman didn't know her, had no reason to defend her, but she was doing it anyway. Maybe this wouldn't be as terrible as she'd feared. Then the interrogation began. The meal was elaborate, course after course of traditional Korean dishes that Deborah barely tasted because she was so focused on not making mistakes. She watched the grandmother, mimicking her movements, waiting for elders to begin before touching her chopsticks, using both hands when receiving dishes passed to her. Between courses, the questions came. The grandmother asked them in Korean, and Chanwook translated, though Deborah suspected his translations were sometimes softer than the original words. How did you meet my grandson? Deborah had prepared for this one. At the restaurant where I worked. He came in for dinner. And he noticed you? The grandmother's eyebrow rose skeptically. Not in a good way, Deborah admitted. We had a disagreement. Chanwook's lips twitched. He clearly remembered that disagreement. The grandmother noticed and said something that made him actually laugh. She wants to know what you disagreed about, he translated. Deborah met the old woman's eyes. About respect. About how people should be treated, regardless of their position. The grandmother's expression sharpened with interest. She asked another question. She wants to know who won the disagreement, Chanwook said. I did, Deborah said. Obviously, since I'm here. The grandmother laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. She said something lengthy, gesturing between Deborah and Chanwook. She says a woman who can stand up to my grandson is either very brave or very foolish, Chanwook translated. But either way, she's interesting. Across the table, Uncle Kyung-soo cleared his throat. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. What do you want from my nephew, Ms. Williams? Money? Status? A way to stay in Korea? The table went quiet. The grandmother frowned at her son, but she didn't stop him. This was a test, Deborah realized. They all wanted to know. Right now? Deborah said carefully. I want to get through this dinner without embarrassing myself. Beyond that, I want to send my sister to university. I want to help my mother pay her medical bills. I want to not worry about rent every month. I want what everyone wants, to take care of the people I love. And you think my nephew can give you these things? Uncle Kyung-soo pressed. I think, Deborah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, that your nephew and I have an arrangement that benefits both of us. What that arrangement is between us. Aunt Min-young laughed, sharp and mocking. An arrangement? How modern? Tell me. Dear, do you even know what family you've walked into? Do you know what business we're in? Min-young, the grandmother said sharply in Korean. Whatever else she said made the aunt's mouth snap shut. But the damage was done. Deborah looked at Chanwook and saw the truth in his eyes. She'd known, intellectually, that his family was involved in organized crime. But sitting here, surrounded by these people with their expensive clothes and cold eyes and casual mention of business, the reality hit differently. These weren't movie villains. They were real. And she was sitting at their table, wearing a dead woman's clothes, pretending to be something she wasn't. The grandmother spoke again, directly to Deborah this time, her tone gentler. Chanwook translated. She's asking where you're from. Tell her about Nigeria. So Deborah did. She talked about Lagos, about growing up in a cramped apartment with her mother and sister, about her father who died when she was 12, about the markets and the music and the food she missed desperately. She talked about why she'd come to Seoul, the promise of opportunity, the chance to build something better. As she spoke, mixing English and broken Korean, she watched the grandmother's face soften. The old woman asked questions, real questions, about Deborah's family and her culture. She wanted to know about Nigerian traditions, about how families were structured, about what foods reminded Deborah of home. She says your mother raised you well. Chanwook translated at one point. She can see it in how you carry yourself. Deborah's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Thank you, she managed in Korean. That means everything. The grandmother reached over and squeezed her hand again, and Deborah realized something surprising. She actually liked this woman. Despite everything, despite the lies and the arrangement and the wrongness of it all, there was something genuine happening at this table. After the meal, the grandmother insisted on showing Deborah the family garden. They walked slowly through the traditional Korean garden, paper lanterns lighting the paths, with Chanwook following a few steps behind to translate. The grandmother spoke at length, pausing occasionally for Chanwook's translation. She's telling you about when she was young, he said. She was from a poor family, nothing like this. When she married my grandfather, his family looked down on her the way my family looked at you tonight. The grandmother continued, her voice taking on a different quality. She says she had to prove herself every day. Chanwook translated. She had to be smarter, stronger, more determined than anyone expected. She raised her sons to value strength of character over bloodlines. That's why. He paused, something flickering across his face. That's why she raised me to lead the family, even though I was young when my father died. She said I had her fire. The old woman turned to Deborah and spoke directly to her in careful, slow Korean. Deborah caught most of it. Something about fire, about strength, about seeing herself in Deborah. I'm not strong, Deborah said in English, then tried again in Korean. I'm just trying to survive. The grandmother smiled sadly and responded. Chanwook translated, his voice quiet. She says that's what strength is. Surviving when everything tells you to give up. Standing up when it would be easier to bow. Slapping a powerful man when he forgets his humanity. Deborah's head whipped toward Chanwook. You told her. I didn't have to, Chanwook said with a slight smile. She asked the restaurant manager what happened that night. She knows everything. The grandmother spoke again, longer this time, her eyes moving between Deborah and Chanwook. She says she wants you to come back next week, Chanwook translated. She wants to teach you to make kimchi the traditional way. She says, he hesitated. She says she hasn't enjoyed a family dinner this much in years. Deborah's stomach dropped. Chanwook, that wasn't the deal. One dinner. We agreed. I know, he said, but I can't exactly say no to her. And he pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed her the screen. Another transfer notification. 10 million won. Consider it a renegotiation. Same rate per dinner. You can say no, but she'll be disappointed. Deborah looked back at the old woman, who was watching her with warm, hopeful eyes. Grandmother without grandchildren around, Deborah realized. Chanwook's sister was studying abroad. The cousins only came for formal occasions. This house, for all its beauty, was probably very lonely. One more dinner, Deborah heard herself say. Just one more. The grandmother beamed and said something that needed no translation. She was happy. As they walked back to the house, Chanwook fell into step beside Deborah. You did well tonight, he said quietly. Better than I expected. You expected me to fail? I expected you to be nervous and stiff and counting the minutes until you could leave, he admitted. Instead, you were honest. You connected with her. You made her laugh. I haven't seen her laugh like that since my father died. There was something in his voice, something raw and unguarded, that made Deborah look at him more closely. In the lantern light, he looked younger, less intimidating, almost vulnerable. She reminds me of my own grandmother, Deborah said. Back in Lagos. She died before I could come to Seoul. I miss her. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Chanwook said, the hanbok suits you. My mother would have liked you. You don't know that. I do, he said. She had a saying. Show me how someone treats a stranger, and I'll show you their character. You treat everyone the same, waitress or grandmother or mafia boss. That's rare in my world. Before Deborah could respond, Uncle Kyung-soo appeared on the path ahead, blocking their way. He spoke in rapid Korean to Chan-wook, his tone aggressive. Chan-wook's response was colder, sharper. The uncle's face darkened with anger. What's happening? Deborah whispered. Family politics, Chan-wook said shortly. Nothing you need to worry about. But as Uncle Kyung-soo stormed past, shooting Deborah a look of pure venom, she thought she understood. She was disrupting something. Her presence here, the grandmother's approval, Chan-wook's attention, it was shifting dynamics that had been set for years. And some people didn't like change. The drive home felt different than the drive there. Deborah sat in the back of the sedan, her mind spinning. 25 million won was now sitting in her account. She'd survived the dinner. She'd actually enjoyed parts of it. The grandmother liked her. Chan-wook had looked at her like she was a person, not just a problem to be solved. And that was dangerous. Because this was supposed to be simple. One dinner, collect the money, walk away. But nothing about this felt simple anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chan-wook. Thank you. You exceeded all expectations. She typed back. One more dinner next week. Then we're done. That's it. His response came quickly. Of course. Whatever you say. But somehow, Deborah didn't believe him. And the scarier part was, she wasn't sure she believed herself either. What would you do in Deborah's position? Would you walk away now, or keep going? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. The following week passed in a strange haze. Deborah found a new job at a coffee shop. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. She sent money to Chioma, enough to cover the entire semester, and listened to her sister's tearful, joyful thanks over the phone. She sent money to her mother for medications and house repairs. For the first time since arriving in Seoul, she wasn't drowning. She could breathe. She could actually think about the future instead of just surviving the present. But she couldn't stop thinking about Sunday. About the grandmother's warm hand on hers. About Chan-wook's rare smile. About how, for those few hours, she'd felt like she belonged somewhere. Min Seo noticed the change. You seem different, she said during their coffee break. Lighter, maybe. Did something happen? Deborah wanted to tell her everything. But how could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? Just got some good news from home, she said instead. My sister got into university. It wasn't a complete lie. Saturday came too quickly. This time, when the black sedan arrived, Deborah was ready. She wore the hanbok again. It felt wrong to wear anything else, and she'd spent the week practicing her Korean with a language app. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. The grandmother greeted her like a long-lost granddaughter, pulling her into a surprisingly strong hug. The kimchi-making lesson took place in the estate's enormous traditional kitchen, just the two of them and Chan-wook occasionally translating when the grandmother's Korean got too fast. She's saying this recipe has been in our family for 4 generations. Chan-wook explained as the grandmother mixed ingredients with practiced ease. Every woman who marries into the family learns it. She taught my mother. My mother was supposed to teach my wife when I had one. The grandmother shot him a sharp look and said something that made him wince. What did she say? Deborah asked. That I'm 31 years old and she'll be dead before I give her great-grandchildren at this rate. Chan-wook translated dryly. Deborah laughed. She's not subtle, is she? Subtlety is for people who have time to waste, Chan-wook said. She does not. As Deborah learned to mix the spices, massage the napa cabbage, pack the kimchi into jars just right, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about the money anymore. This wasn't about fulfilling an arrangement. This was about connection, about being taught something precious, about matching to someone. The grandmother spoke again, placing her weathered hands over Deborah's younger ones, guiding her movements. She says you have good hands, Chan-wook translated. Strong but gentle. That's important for kimchi. Too rough, and you bruise the cabbage. Too gentle, and you don't mix the flavors properly. It's about balance. Like life, Deborah said softly. The grandmother nodded, understanding even though Deborah had spoken in English. Some things didn't need translation. Later, as they sat in the garden drinking tea, the grandmother asked Deborah about her sister. Chan-wook translated the questions and answers, but Deborah noticed how his expression changed as she talked about Chioma's dreams of becoming a doctor, about her intelligence and determination, about how she was the first in their family to attend university. She says education is the greatest gift a family can give, Chan-wook translated. She made sure all her grandchildren had the best schools, the best opportunities. She's glad your sister will have the same. It's because of you, Deborah said, looking at Chanwook. The money you paid me, most of it went to her tuition. Something complicated flickered across his face. I'm glad it's being put to good use. The grandmother spoke again, then stood, indicating she was tired and needed to rest. She hugged Deborah goodbye, holding on longer than necessary, then said something soft in Korean that Chanwook didn't translate. She just smiled and patted Deborah's cheek before shuffling toward the house. Deborah and Chanwook stood alone in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere nearby, a fountain burbled peacefully. What did she say? Deborah asked. At the end, Chanwook was quiet for a long moment. Then, she said, don't let this one go. She's the real thing. Deborah's breath caught. Chanwook. I know, he said quickly. I know this is just an arrangement. I know you're doing this for the money. I'm not asking for anything more. But I need you to understand something. He turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability in his eyes was startling. My grandmother is dying. Cancer. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. She doesn't know I know. She hasn't told the family yet. But I see it. The way she tires easily. The medication she thinks I don't notice. The weight she's losing. Deborah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God. These dinners, this time with you. It's the happiest I've seen her in years, Chanwook continued. I know I'm asking too much. I know this wasn't the deal. But please, keep coming. Not every week if you don't want to. But sometimes. Let her have this. You should have told me, Deborah said, tears pricking her eyes. You should have told me from the beginning. Would you have come if you'd known you were being used to comfort a dying woman? Deborah thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe not. It feels manipulative. It is manipulative, Chanwook agreed. Everything about this situation is manipulative. I'm paying you to pretend to care about my family. I'm using your financial desperation to bring happiness to my grandmother's last months. I'm a bad person, Deborah. I told you that from the start. You're not, Deborah said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. A bad person wouldn't care that his grandmother was happy. A bad person wouldn't notice she was sick. A bad person wouldn't feel guilty about any of this. Chanwook laughed, but it was a broken sound. You don't know the things I've done. You're right. I don't. And maybe I don't want to know. Deborah took a deep breath. I'll keep coming. Not for the money. You can stop paying me if you want. I'll come because your grandmother deserves to be happy. And because, she hesitated. Because I like her. And because this place, these dinners, they make me feel less alone in this city. I won't stop paying you, Chanwook said. That wouldn't be fair. You're giving up your time, taking risks by associating with my family. You deserve to be compensated. They stood there in the fading light, and Deborah realized that something had shifted between them. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't just two people with a business arrangement. They were something else, something undefined, something that probably shouldn't exist, but did anyway. I should go, Deborah said, breaking the moment. Stay for dinner, Chanwook said. The family's coming again. They'll expect to see you. So Deborah stayed. And this time, when Uncle Kyung-soo made a snide comment about her presence, she shot back in halting Korean. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. The grandmother cackled with delight, and even some of the cousins smiled. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Deborah would visit twice a week, Sunday dinners with the full family, and Saturday afternoons alone with the grandmother in Chanwook. She learned to make more traditional dishes. She practiced her Korean until she could hold basic conversations. She heard stories about Chanwook's childhood, about his father's death, about the family's history. And slowly, without meaning to, she started to care. She cared about the grandmother's health, noticed when she had good days and bad days. She cared about the tension between Chanwook and his uncle, the way power struggles played out in subtle gestures and coded language. She even cared about Chanwook himself, the way he carried the weight of his family's expectations, the way he was ruthless in business but gentle with his grandmother, the way he looked at Deborah when he thought she wasn't watching. One Saturday, 2 months into their arrangement, everything changed. Deborah arrived to find only Chanwook waiting for her. The grandmother's not feeling well, he explained. She's resting upstairs. But she insisted I not cancel. She said you and I should spend time together anyway. They sat in the garden, awkward without the grandmother as a buffer. Chanwook poured tea with careful precision, and Deborah noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Is she okay? Deborah asked. For now, Chanwook said. But it's getting worse. The doctors want her to start more aggressive treatment, but she's refusing. She says she's lived enough, seen enough. She doesn't want to spend her last months sick from chemotherapy. What do you want? Deborah asked. I want her to live forever, Chanwook said simply. but I don't get what I want. I never have. They sat in silence, drinking tea, listening to the fountain. Then Chanwook said, "Can I ask you something? And will you answer honestly?" "Maybe," Deborah said cautiously. "Why do you really keep coming here? I know what you tell yourself, that you're doing this for the grandmother, for the money, because you have nowhere else to be on weekends. But what's the real reason?" Deborah set down her teacup, taking time to form her answer. "When I came to Seoul, I thought I was running towards something. Opportunity, a better life, a future. But really, I was running away. Away from poverty, away from feeling trapped, away from being just another struggling girl in Lagos with no prospects. And I came here and realized that running away doesn't solve anything. You're just alone in a different place." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "This house, your grandmother, even you. You make me feel less alone. For a few hours each week. I'm not a foreign worker who barely speaks the language. I'm not invisible. I'm part of something. Even if it's temporary, even if it's not quite real. That's worth more than money." Chanwook was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's real for me. Whatever this is, it's the most real thing in my life." Before Deborah could respond, shouting erupted from the house. Chanwook was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor changing from vulnerable to dangerous in a heartbeat. Mr. Park rushed into the garden, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. It's Siocho gang. They hit one of our warehouses an hour ago. 3 of our men are dead. They left a message. They're declaring war." Deborah watched Chanwook's face harden into something cold and terrifying. This was the man who ran organized crime in Gangnam. This was the man who made people disappear. For the past 2 months, she'd been seeing a different version of him. But now the mask was back. "Mobilize everyone," Chanwook ordered. "I want locations, numbers, everything. They want war. We'll give them war." "Sir," Mr. Park glanced at Deborah. "Perhaps Ms. Williams should leave. If Siocho knows about her." "They don't," Chanwook interrupted. "We've been careful. And even if they did, they wouldn't dare touch her. That would be too far, even for them." But something in Mr. Park's expression said he wasn't so sure. And Deborah, watching this unfold, realized that she'd been living in a bubble. She'd been playing house with a dangerous man, pretending that Sunday dinners and kimchi lessons were real life. But this was real life, violence and death and gang warfare. "I should go," Deborah said, standing. "No." Chanwook's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Stay in the house. It's safer. My men are everywhere. Nothing will happen to you here." "I'm not part of this world," Deborah said. "I should never have pretended I was." "You're part of it now," Chanwook said, and there was something desperate in his voice. "Like it or not, you're part of my life. And I protect what's mine." "I'm not yours," Deborah said, pulling her wrist free. "I'm not anyone's." She left the estate, despite Chanwook's protests, despite Mr. Park's concerned face. She got in a taxi and went back to her apartment, her hands shaking, her mind reeling. She'd been foolish. She'd let herself care about a man who lived in a world of violence. She'd let herself pretend that they could have something real. That night, lying in bed, Deborah made a decision. No more dinners. No more pretending. She would send Chanwook a message tomorrow, thank him for the money, and disappear from his life before things got more complicated. But she never got the chance to send that message. Because at 2 a.m., Minesio called. Her voice panicked. "Deborah, there are men watching your building. Black SUVs. They've been there for hours." Deborah's blood ran cold. She crept to her window and peered through the curtains. 2 black SUVs sat on the street below, their engines idling. Men stood nearby, smoking, watching the building entrance. "Call the police," Minesio urged. "And tell them what? That men are legally parked on a public street." Deborah's mind raced. "They're waiting for me to leave. They can't come in without making a scene. But the moment I step outside." Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Chanwook." "Don't hang up," he said immediately. "Siocho knows about you. I don't know how, but they know. My uncle," his voice was tight with rage. "Uncle Kyung-soo has been feeding them information. He thought if they killed me, he'd take over the family. He told them you're my weakness." "I'm not your weakness," Deborah said. "We barely know each other." "Tell them that," Chanwook said. "They've been watching you for days. They saw us together. They think taking you will draw me into a trap." Deborah's legs gave out. She sat hard on her bed. "What do I do?" "Stay inside. I'm sending men to get you. 20 minutes. Chanwook, please." And there it was again, that vulnerability she'd glimpsed in the garden. "Please trust me. I can keep you safe, but you have to let me." Those 20 minutes felt like hours. Deborah packed a bag with shaking hands. Clothes, documents, phone charger. She called her sister, told her she loved her, promised everything was fine even though her voice cracked on the words. She called her mother and heard the worry in her voice even across the miles and continents. When Chan-wook's men arrived, they came through the building's back entrance, moving with military precision. They surrounded Deborah, hustling her down the back stairs and into a waiting vehicle. As they pulled away, she saw the Siocho men react, jumping into their SUVs to follow. "Don't worry, miss," the driver said in accented English. "We lose them." And they did, through a series of turns and backstreets that left Deborah dizzy and disoriented. When they finally stopped, they were at the Bay family estate. The gates swung open, and Deborah was rushed inside. Chan-wook was waiting in the main hall, his face a thunderstorm. When he saw her, relief flashed across his features before the cold mask returned. "You're safe now. No one can touch you here." "For how long?" Deborah demanded. "Am I supposed to hide in your house forever?" "No, just until I end this." The way he said it left no doubt what ending this meant. Violence. Blood. Death. "Don't," Deborah said. "Please don't do this because of me." "This isn't because of you," Chan-wook said, though they both knew he was lying. Siocho has been pushing boundaries for months. This was inevitable. The grandmother appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slowly, leaning on her cane. She took in the scene, Deborah's frightened face, Chan-wook's rage, the armed men stationed throughout the house, and understood immediately. She spoke in rapid Korean, her voice sharp. "She's ordering me not to do anything rash," Chan-wook translated. "She says violence breeds violence, and this family has seen enough blood." "Listen to her," Deborah pleaded. But Chan-wook's phone was already buzzing. He answered, listened, and his face went deadly calm. "They took one of my warehouses. They're holding the night crew hostage. They're sending me videos." He turned the phone so Deborah could see. Men bound and kneeling, a message in Korean spray painted on the wall behind them. "What does it say?" Deborah whispered. "Send us the girl, or they die," Chan-wook translated. "Your choice." The room went silent. Everyone was looking at Deborah. The grandmother was shaking her head, saying something firm in Korean. Mr. Park was on his phone, barking orders. And Chan-wook was looking at Deborah like she was the only person in the world. "I'll go," Deborah said. "I'll go if it saves them." "No." Chan-wook's voice was absolute. "You won't. I'll get them out another way." "How many people have to die because I slapped you in a restaurant?" Deborah demanded. "Because your grandmother liked me? Because we played pretend for a few weeks?" "It wasn't pretend," Chan-wook said quietly. "Not for me. And I don't trade lives. I save my people. All of them. Including you." What happened next was a blur. Chan-wook mobilized his entire organization. Hundreds of men descending on the warehouse where Siocho was holding hostages. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was war. Deborah stayed at the estate with the grandmother, watching news helicopters circle the Incheon district, hearing reports of gunfire and police sirens. The grandmother held Deborah's hand and spoke in Korean. Deborah's language skills had improved enough to understand. This was always going to happen. "You didn't cause this. You just made him remember what he's fighting for." When Chan-wook finally returned at dawn, he was bloodied but alive. The hostages were safe. Siocho's leadership was decimated. Uncle Kyung-soo had been banished from the family, sent away in disgrace. The cost had been high. Good men dead, buildings destroyed, a war that would have consequences for years, but it was over. Chan-wook found Deborah in the garden, watching the sunrise. He sat beside her, exhausted, haunted by what he'd done. "I should go," Deborah said. "Back to my apartment, back to my life. I can't be part of this world." "I know," Chan-wook said. "I'll have Mr. Park arrange protection until you can leave the country safely. I'll pay for your flight home, give you enough money too." "I don't want your money," Deborah interrupted. "I never wanted your money. Not really." They sat in silence as the sun painted the sky pink and gold. Then Deborah said, "Your grandmother has 6 months, you said?" "Maybe less now, after the stress of last night." "Then I'll stay," Deborah decided. "I'll keep coming to dinners. I'll learn her recipes. I'll listen to her stories. Not for money. Not because I have to. Because she deserves to be happy. And because," she finally looked at him, "because you deserve something real in your life. Even if it's scary. Even if it's complicated. Even if it started with a lie." Chan-wook's hand found hers. "Are you sure? My world is dangerous. Last night proved that." "I'm sure," Deborah said. And she was. "Besides, I already slapped one Mafia boss. What else can they do to me?" He laughed, really laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. 6 months later, the grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. Deborah was there, holding her other hand, speaking to her in fluent Korean about love and strength and found families. At the funeral, every major family in Seoul's underworld attended, and they all saw Deborah standing beside Chan-wook, not behind him, not as his property, but as his equal. She never went back to Nigeria. Seoul became home. The estate became home. Chan-wook became home. She finished her degree, started a foundation for immigrant workers, taught Korean kids about Nigerian culture. And every Sunday, she made kimchi the way the grandmother taught her, keeping the tradition alive. When people asked how they met, Deborah always smiled and said, "I slapped him in a restaurant. It was the best decision I ever made." And Chan-wook, standing beside her, would add, "She saw me when I was invisible to myself. She saved me. We saved each other," Deborah would correct. Because that's what love is. Two people who choose each other again and again, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when it starts with a lie that becomes the truest thing either of them has ever known. If you made it to the end of this incredible journey, you're amazing. Show some love by hitting that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Drop a comment and tell me, what did you think of Deborah and Chan-wook's story? What would you have done differently? Your engagement helps this channel grow and bring you more amazing content. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best things in life start with the courage to stand up for yourself, even when the whole world is watching.